So now we're going to completely change gears, and we're going to talk about how do you play games. And I've got a list of them here. This may not be all of them. I'd love to hear your response on what you feel to be the way you play games. I'm going to go over these because I think this is a pretty extensive and comprehensive list of the ways that a person can play a game. Now notice, I'm not differentiating in this case between card games, board games, miniatures games, role-play games, even social games. How do you prefer to play games? Are you an explorer? And when I say explorer, it's not necessarily an explorer of the environment. Of course, many games nowadays are built in what they call 4X. The idea that you are exploring and exploiting an environment or whatever. That's one thing, but an explorer in a gameplay is actually looking for loopholes in the rules. I have a friend of mine that when he was playing a card game, we were using 2 decks of cards. And the rules stated that when you shuffled up the cards and you dealt them, you were to deal each person 6. But it didn't say specifically that you had to deal in numeric order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 around the table. You could actually choose which card went to whom as long as everybody ended up with a hand of 6. And this clever person realized that because there were pairs in the games that were important, that he could increase his chances of getting pairs by dealing all of, say, the red cards to one person and all the blue cards to another, and then giving himself a mix, because he doubled his chances of getting multiple pairs. Now, that's kind of crooked, but nonetheless, there was no rule against it, and so an explorer will dig through the rules of a game, even as he's playing it, to look for those loopholes that will give him some advantage. The second type here, and these are in no particular numeric order, simply the order that came out of my brain. The second one's a lawyer. And a lawyer is going to study the rules and utilize the ambiguities, the places in the rules that are not explicit but are implicit, and therefore modify his chances of success failure by which rules are being enforced, and those that are ambiguous, he can therefore gauge and guide the interpretation of those rules. The third kind of player is one who he doesn't mind playing, but he's really not that interested in the game, and instead he decides he's going to be a punching bag. And by that I mean he's going to let others win every time. He's not playing with any intention of advancing or succeeding. Perhaps you are the kind of player who is a helper. You have learned the rules and you just want to make sure others are having fun. So you're going to facilitate that by helping to understand the rules, perhaps overlooking when something egregious has happened that would interfere with the fun that people are having. The helper can be a really useful way of looking at gameplay, but it also can be somewhat of a challenge when you are trying to be the helper while actually trying to win at the game, because sometimes you're actually going to assist the other person in making decisions that are adverse to your own position. Of course, the next would be perhaps you're a mutant, and that's just my term for someone who races headlong without thinking. You're not considering what the rules are to the game. You're just wanting to see what would happen if you press the big red button. And this is certain people, that's the way they like to play, and it's perhaps damaging to the game overall, but that's a completely different subject, isn't it? This is just how you prefer to play. The next one is the boss, and this is perhaps where I start to have an issue with a player, is that if they are trying to be a boss, they're not worried about whether they're succeeding or failing. They're just wanting to make sure that others are following the rules. They may themselves be making rules errors, or they may not even know the mechanics of the game, but they nonetheless are just being bossy to others and trying to enforce into the other players how the game is played. The next are the overthinkers. And an overthinker is someone who suffers from analysis paralysis. Sometimes games have many, many options, and it's difficult to decide which one. If you're an overthinker, perhaps you should be considering games that are less crunchy to give yourself an opportunity to pick up and understand the rules sooner. Or you need to play with an audience that's very patient, because the overthinker can be a time suck to the game, so to speak, and therefore even affect actively how long the game will last. The next are the breakers and benders, and it's a little bit like the concept of the explorer, but the breaker bender is actually looking for the flaws in the design that can be exploited for their success, intentionally trying to win the game by changing or modifying the thought process about the game by finding those weak chinks in the design. Of course, the next are the role players, and this tends to be me. If I'm playing any game at all, I'm going to role play the mechanics of the game. And what that means is that I'm going to look at the random number generation in the game and explain how that fits the, quote, story of the game. If you failed to make a trade last turn in a game, well, that was basically probably because you didn't offer enough in the trade, or perhaps you just didn't talk to the right banker, etc., etc. The idea is that being a role player doesn't necessarily influence the outcome of the game, but it does tend to make the game play more enjoyable, because you're looking at say a crappy die roll and explaining how it maybe was caused by the environment or whatever, and just narratively making it more enjoyable. Of course, the next are the wallflowers, and there are a ton of people that are this. They'll come and sit down to play a game. They love being included in the people being there. They love being part of the team. They love the experience of being together, but they don't want to confront. They don't want to actually make decisions. These are the guys that in a role-play game are in the what is sometimes called the peanut gallery, or the second tier, and they're watching the other players take actions instead of themselves becoming involved in the story. And I tend to be the kind of person that breaks the wallflowers out. Eventually, as a game master, I'm going to draw you as a wallflower into the game, and you'll be therefore interacting with us as we go, because wallflower as a position really is untenable in the long term. It doesn't give you a chance at victory. It just simply means that you're not going to be in any confrontations. And then, of course, there's the players. And the players who come to play just love to mix it up. Maybe they take on a role of a boss for a couple of minutes. Maybe they spend one or two games as the punching bag. They just want to make sure we're all enjoying a good time, and they enjoy the competition and the friendliness of the game session as it is. Finally, there are the scorekeepers. And what's really kind of amazing to me is that there are scorekeepers in every game, including games that don't have a winner or a loser, such as role-play games. A scorekeeper is a person who tracks the values of numbers and counts the wins and losses. So whether we're talking about the number of arrows that were fired and whether or not they got them all back, that is for them a micro game, and that therefore they're going to track all of the details of that. And while that can be enjoyable for a bit, many games don't have a need for such a scorekeeper, so it just is a way of redefining how you play. Now, this has been my list, and it's by far not fully exhaustive, although it is rather extensive. So what kind of game players are there in your game? Who do you have at the table that isn't listed here? I'd love to hear from you, so let's get a conversation going in the comments. Alrighty, so let's move on. Alrighty, so we have concluded our show for tonight. We're coming up on the end. I first of all want to thank you for playing along, for being such a trooper and watching through the entire video. If you have, I do have an offer for you. If you send me a direct message, I'll send you a free copy of the NycosRPG role-playing game. Give me more information. Give me your contact information in that PM, and I'll get it back to you as quickly as I can. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is NycosRPG. I'm Game Master Jay, and you keep on playing. Talk.